Accept the Bible, there are lots of reasons, and I've heard this weekend that it's perfect, infallible, without contradiction, and that no one has shown otherwise, which is shifting the burden of proof. And yet I'll point you to the Skeptic's Annotated Bible and infidels.org, which list have a massive collection of listed proposed contradictions and absurdities. I don't accept all of them. I think some of them are dumb, but others are more difficult. But the problem is, whenever I raise these, the response I get is very similar to the response I got last night. You just don't understand the Bible. You don't understand the Bible. The Bible properly interpreted, the Bible read correctly, the Bible understood correctly. These are the things that we get, and yet there's no demonstration of the method one would use to properly understand or interpret the Bible, apart from continuing to appeal to the Bible or saying, oh, we'll find out when it's true. That is not a methodology for determining truth, and it's the reason we have so many different denominations within Christianity and even divisions within the Church of Christ, because you think you've got the right answer and they think they've got the right answer, and there is no demonstrated mechanism for finding out. And by the way, just pick one little doctrinal thing, the requirement of baptism for salvation. I mean, I don't know enough about what you've discussed about this, but basically, everybody who doesn't believe that, I'm presuming, they're damned. And so for thousands of years, or 1,800 years, until somebody found the right interpretation, everybody else had it wrong. No matter how sincere they were, no matter how much they were trying to promote Christ, no matter how much they were trying to encourage others to come to Christ, no matter how devout they were, they all got it wrong. And yet God didn't seem to offer any correction. And yet there came a correct interpretation by some people's minds. Men have invented gods, and some people think that theirs is the only one that wasn't invented. But we look at this scientifically. We've hooked people up to an fMRI, a way of scanning the brain, and we ask questions. And you can ask people questions. What do you think about this? And a part of the brain will light up anytime they're talking about what they think. And if you say, what does Joe Blow think about this? Another part of the brain will light up in response to that question, because now they're not thinking about what they would do. They are putting themselves in the position of some other thinking agent and saying, what would this person think about it? And so you can ask people these questions. What would you do about this? Boom. What would Joe do about this? Boom. Which side lights up when you ask them what God thinks? This side. The side that refers to self. That's confirmation that we each invent a God of our own creation. We have our own internal model. Whether or not it maps to an actual God is still an open question. Whether or not you can come up with an apologetic that says, oh, well, the reason this side lights up is because God is so intricately tuned to us that we don't even think of him as another being, and so, of course, we're thinking with ourselves. And yet, curiously, that doesn't solve a problem at all. Because what we see and what we observe is that when people think about what does God think, they're using the side of the brain that is about what they think. And that would be okay if they were consistent and in agreement, but they're not. So given the number of potential gods out there, the ones that we know were man-made, and that we can't determine if any of them were in fact man-made, and the fact that each individual has their own God concept, which seems, by all available evidence, to consistently agree with them, which is how we end up in these disputes. My position is that the most reasonable conclusion is that gods are man-made. Are they intentional fictions constructed by people? No. I think some of them probably are. I'm not the cynical religions and gods were invented to control the masses and keep the people down, and only the opium of the masses and stupid people believe this. I was a Christian for 25 years. My IQ didn't go up when I stopped believing. I don't think Christians are stupid. Otherwise, I'd think I was stupid. I like myself way too much to think I was stupid. But I do think I was wrong. I do think I was mistaken. And I know that I was sincere. When I hear people talk about, was God a human invention? I don't think of it as an intentional machination to control or construct something. I look at it more as simple errors in thinking, simple errors in reasoning, We need an explanation for this. We can't come up with one. We don't currently have one. We are incredibly frustrated that we don't have one. Hey, wait, this God can do anything, which means we can plug it in as an explanation for anything. And the universe will be consistent with that because that's exactly why we proffered it in the first place. But my concern is with whether or not it's real. And if you start with a blank slate, if you start without any presuppositions, it's difficult, it's virtually impossible to get rid of all of your baggage. But if you try, and you say, nope, I'm going to set down the Bible, and I'm not going to begin with the assumption that it's correct. And instead, I'm going to try to prove that it's correct. Or instead, I'm going to try to explore this and then come back and find out if what the Bible had to say is consistent with what I found, that's fine. And if that's where you end up, God bless you. But I need actual evidence of a God. And as far as I can tell, the most reasonable conclusion is that we have invented gods, sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally, as the result of the normal way we think. Lots of appeals to common sense this weekend. Common sense is wrong, a lot. Common sense gets us into trouble. It's the reason that we rely on reason. It's the reason that we want sound epistemologies. It's the reason that when we're in a court of law trying to determine whether or not a God exists, and the prosecution is claiming that the God exists, my position is not guilty. I find God not guilty of existence. Every God that's been proposed, not guilty. Doesn't mean I think they're innocent. Doesn't mean I'm asserting that there are no gods. Like I said, it's an unfalsifiable proposition. I can't prove that gods don't exist. That's not where the burden of proof rests. And I can't prove that any specific God is necessarily a man-made fiction. But I have to go with what I find most reasonable. And given the weight of the evidence from the broader world, not just appealing to one holy book or one tradition, or whether or not something happens to be consistent with reality, I have to come to the conclusion that the most reasonable position is that gods are man-made. And this is not something that I claim as an absolute certainty, which we kind of talked about absolute certainty last night. But thanks.